Okay, we have another tier list here. Your Pavlovian response has been triggered. You are slobbering like a dog because I know you love a good tier list. I don't know. Some people do. Lots of people do. They're very popular. R6 NAL 2022 teams. If you want to search this on Tier Maker, you can pull this up and make your own if you care to. All right, so yeah, the 10 teams are represented here by their logos. If you're unfamiliar with their logos or just what teams are in the NAL in general, we have Astralis, Beast Coast, Dark Zero, Oxygen, Xset, Parabellum, Mirage, Sonics, Space Station, and TSM. And okay, I only have 4 tiers here, and if you pull this up on your own, it's going to have 1 through 10 already set up for you. I just narrowed it down to 4. I'm still going to do it in order, but I sort of have an idea of who I think are on similar levels going into the stage. So each of the tiers should have 2 or 3 teams in it. And also keep in mind, this is intended to be more of a power ranking than my prediction for how they're going to place in stage 1. But I mean, you can basically just call it my predictions. The true skill of the teams would probably shine through better if they played all best of 3s, but there's a lot more room for upsets and best of 1. So again, not necessarily how I think they'll place, but I guess it might as well be my best guess for how they're going to place. So you can call it my prediction for the rankings, or you can call it the power rankings, whichever. Okay, starting at the bottom here, Mirage. So I think at this point, it looks like the teams are indeed divided into a top half and a bottom half, a top 5 and a bottom 5. There was that consistent top 4 for NA for the longest time, and I mean, a little bit of a spoiler, I guess, but probably a lot of you see this coming. It's pretty much the same as it was before, but adding in the Sonics there and the other bottom tier teams, they are just largely unproven. Astralis has been around, and some of the other orgs have been around last year, but 4 new teams basically in Mirage, Beast Coast, Xset, and Parabellum. And just for my eye, I feel like Mirage looks like perhaps the weakest team going into it. So we have Thomas and Benji remaining on the roster from last year. Benji, I guess, was there all last year. Thomas just played in stage 3 on Mirage, playing the other 2 stages on Xset. And they've both been decent. Neither of them had a terrible performance. Neither of them had an especially standout performance. So, I mean, that bodes like fairly well. They usually don't get destroyed, but they also haven't put in a ton of work. And it just seems like it's really hard to find someone on this roster who looks like they're going to put in a ton of work. And if anybody, Razor, I think, for my money, is the one that would do it. So, right, that's the other player on this roster that has previously played in T1. He played on Xset last year, and I think looked like one of their better, if not their best player at the time, but still not spectacular. And a lot of that is resulting from him being just on a not very spectacular team. So I think Razor has a chance to pop off here, and I mean, I think this team is definitely going to need 1 or 2 players, whether or not he is one of them, to pop off for them to really do well. The other 2 players are Melted and Marmalade. So Melted coming over from Parabellum, but still not having played in T1 yet. He qualified for T1 on Parabellum, but moved over to Mirage here before the stage has started. And I mean, maybe it bodes well, the fact that he decided to go to this team instead of staying on that team. Maybe they were kind of trying to drop him from the other team anyways. Maybe there's inner turmoil. Maybe he just sees a lot of potential in this team as opposed to that one. I don't know. Maybe he knew Spirits was going to leave, so he wanted to, just whatever it is. But for now, just unproven. And same thing with Marmalade. She didn't qualify for T1, which doesn't really make a difference, but also hasn't played in T1 just the same as Melted. So again, 3 players that we haven't seen spectacular performances from, but again, not terrible performances. I'm not saying that. So right, 3 players that have been sort of average, and then 2 players that we have not seen in T1. So I'm going to put them down here for now. I am ready to be pleasantly surprised, but I don't particularly expect to be. I will be rooting for these guys over certain other teams, though, for sure. Okay, next up, Parabellum. So they're in a similar boat to Mirage. I think Parabellum might have had a better shot if they'd stuck with their roster with Melted and Spirits, but those 2 departed the roster, and they have Creators and Wimpy now, with Blaz supposed to be stepping in for Wimpy starting in stage 2. For now, right, we have Wimpy, who's been pretty good in CL for quite a long time. I think recently he struggled in, the most recent stage or something like that. But pretty good overall. And then Creators, good on Tempo Storm, sort of middling on Xset, but never like a terrible performance overall. And then the other 3 players are new. So Penguin and Kool-Aid and Eska. So, right, just the newest in terms of sheer number of players to T1, right? Only one player on the roster having played before, and then, I mean, two if you count Blaz once he actually comes in, because he has played in EUL. So unless I'm mistaken that right, because XSET has 2 players that have played before, Beast Coast has like 3, Mirage has 3. Yeah, okay, so it does look that way. But for now, and this could also just be similar to Mirage, like I'm unsure if they'll be able to hang, because I think all of the rosters, even in the bottom 5, they look all right. Like they can probably hang, but I just don't know if they're going to be strong enough to avoid there being a pretty big gap between the top and the bottom. Maybe some of these teams will break into the top, but for now they look a decent bit weaker to me. But it is very hard to assess just with the sheer number of players that are here that have not yet played in T1. So right, Parabellum down there at 9th, and then we're gonna move up a tier, and maybe there's not a massive gap between these 2 tiers, but I see it just a little bit of a gap. So we have XSET. Some people might think XSET deserves to be higher, maybe above Astralis and Beast Coast, maybe some different order, but I don't think XSET at 8th place is going to be especially controversial here. So Kino and Yaga coming over from Oxygen, those are the only 2 players that have had T1 experience before. Spirits and Diaz and Gomez have all been playing really well in T2. They've been playing pretty well at the top of T2 and keeping it super competitive. There's a handful of the T2 teams that are like pretty close to T1, and Parabellum was one of them, like Investigation File, One Shot, and I feel like one or 2 others that I'm sort of blanking on here. But these are the team. Aerial Rise, which is where Diaz and Gomez come from. I don't think it's Aerial Rise anymore, but right, that's what it was at the time. So yeah, they are coming from good T2 teams, and they've all put in good performances. My concern with this team is their lack of a central leader sort of figure. I think Kino is supposed to be IGLing, maybe more than anyone else, but they're also doing the hybrid and super hybrid IGL system, because Kino said that they're all supposed to be making calls, and some teams will have like the one main IGL and maybe a secondary IGL, but some teams will have like 2 or 3 that are pretty much sharing the load, and then I guess some teams just don't even really have an IGL because they're all supposed to be making calls. I do question that system. I feel like you need to have probably one person who has the final say, and maybe that is supposed to be the case with Kino, but yeah, and then it probably is better to have even just another player that is super vocal. So like if you have one person and also making calls, so if you have your IGL on, say, support, and then you have like a secondary IGL playing flex or entry, then they're sort of in a different area of the map doing a different thing, and they can really focus on making calls based on what they see rather than having to transfer that information to another player to make the calls. So different systems can work differently. They can all work well, but I just feel like this is perhaps the least proven system in terms of a top tier play. And also, I don't know how well Kino and Yaga are going to thrive here with I mentioned this in the previous video, with their lack of the pre-built structure for them. They were quite successful when they got to play on auction with Vertical and Laxing and Foxay, but that 3-man core has proven to be successful with whatever other 2 players are on it. So I think just a sort of unbalanced looking sort of team, in that they're all really young, and they're all sort of like, they're gunners, and that doesn't just because you're a good gunner doesn't necessarily detract from your other skills, but I do feel like perhaps some of them are lacking in those other skills that maybe they'll refine over their time in T1, but for now, I just don't know if their coordination, communication, things like this are going to be up to par to put them above some of the other teams. And I think based on just like raw skill alone, I put them above the other 2. Maybe Vivas and Bodega will expedite things, will provide a sort of structure to the team that will allow them to play better than they would without them, I guess. But we'll have to see. So another big question mark team, but just as a lot of these teams are. And then moving up, this might be a little bit controversial too. Well, you could see Beast Coast is going to be above these 4 teams, and maybe that's just my hot pick here. But Astralis, so they're definitely a team that has looked like they've had a lot of potential. I might be rating them more highly if their struggles had come in stage 1 and they looked better in stage 2 and 3, but it's just been downhill for them. So they got 4th place in stage 1. They were Disrupt at the time, but pretty well the same. Most of the same players and basically the same team. So, right, 4th place in stage 1, then they got 5th place in stage 2. Sadly for them, in stage 1, there was no major, so I think they would have been able to go to a major, but that didn't happen. So, right, 5th place in stage 2, just missing out on the major. And then I don't remember off the top of my head. It's like 7th place did they get maybe? Right around there, bottom 3 or 4 or something. They were very close to getting relegated towards the end, and they had a lot of really big struggles, and they might well have been relegated if it wasn't for J9O's monster performance over the course of the season. I think, but he went super crazy. I think it was against Oxygen, maybe. It was on Coastline, but did he end up losing that game anyways? So maybe it didn't make that much of a difference. They ended up beating just enough teams to avoid relegation and whatnot. But they do have things to figure out. Forest and Callout seem like they'll make a difference, but Forest and Callout haven't exactly been a force in T1 in the past. So because of their history, and even it's not like they were super dominant in T2 either. They were good, of course. Wichita Wolves / Ape being at one point, I think the highest placing CL team, and maybe it's up to interpretation if you think they were actually the best team, but they certainly were the number 1 team at one point by placement. So yeah, I think Callout and maybe even Forest is a little bit of what this team needs. A lot of people were saying Retro was kind of bad or kind of washed or whatever, so maybe him being swapped out for a fresher player will do wonders. Maybe they figure out the roles here, and maybe if some of their players can up their consistency. I'm placing them, of course, above 3 other teams, but I still need to see more from them, especially considering how dashed I think a lot of their fans' hopes were in that last stage, because they were just fighting for that top position in stage 2. They just missed out on the major, and then they were just on the verge of relegation the very next stage. So, and they were just like looking pretty bad even against like Mirage, Beast Coast, and XSET teams that weren't very good at the time. And okay, so that puts Beast Coast here. So, and well, I mean, as I kind of talked about, and as you might have guessed, we have this top 5 coming up soon. Beast Coast is, I mean, they could be 10th place, they could be 3rd place, I don't know. They could do a lot of things. So Drip is getting another chance here. He's been denied many chances to play Pro League, and then he actually got to play in XSET, but because of, I mean, just how bad that team kind of was, and then just the team environment and chemistry in general, he didn't get to stick around for too long. But he put up good stats, which, and stats aren't the biggest thing ever, but especially in stage 2, he put up pretty good stats. So we'll see what he does with his, by some metrics, it's like his 4th chance, but in reality, it's more like his 2nd chance. He now gets to play with his old teammate Sweater, who, if Sweater lives up to the expectations of everybody, he should be absolutely killing it, and he might be able to single-handedly drag his team up to this position, or even higher than this position. Hopefully he doesn't flop. That'd be kind of tough to see. Continuing on with the experience though, Slashug has played quite a lot, but not too recently. He left T1 I mean over a year ago, right? And then he left the game even for a little bit, but now he's been back on the grind. He was supposed to be on Gotcha's team in CL, and then that team just sort of disbanded. He played on the FPL Queens in the qualifier, in the SI qualifier, and he looked quite good. The open qualifier, at least. They didn't quite make it to the closed qualifier. And then Anthony, who looked like the best player on Beast Coast, and then that leaves Surf, who I think definitely has a lot to prove. He wasn't thought of as that good of a player in CL, but he's been looking better and better recently. So I think, even though this is a pretty big question mark, just like XSET and Mirage and even like Parabellum, I feel like I see a really high ceiling for this team, maybe similar to XSET, but for some reason I just feel like these guys are going to get in the swing of things more quickly, and I do think a lot of that will come from the fact that they had Anthony that played for a whole year on Beast Coast, and XSET had Kino and Yaga that played for the same amount of time. Drip played for less time, but he played for like about half the year. But Slashug, I'm hoping and thinking he will make a pretty big difference as that veteran voice, and just someone who's been around for a long time in a lot of different environments, and I think he might be a big difference maker for that team, as well as Sweater, not in the experience, but in just terms of pure fragging skill. All right, so that puts us into the top half here, and okay, I think there's going to be, 2 in this tier and 3 in this one. So Dark Zero, and this can all be switched around. All of these were the teams that were at SI, and they all put up pretty decent performances at SI. Space Station, the worst performance, they got 9th through 12th. Dark Zero and Oxygen both getting 7th through 8th. Sonic's getting 5th through 6th, and TSM got 1st place. And I'm not rating them here just based on their SI performance. I do think it is important, but Like Dark Zero and Oxygen only got 1 round further than Space Station, and then Sonics only got 1 round further than Oxygen and Dark Zero. And any round you advance further is big. Like, you're knocking out some of the other best teams in the world, and you are winning a pretty momentous best of 3 to get there. But we are playing best of 1, so that is really influencing my decisions here. We saw the NAL finals also, but that wasn't best of 1, so I am going to have to weigh the results of like stage, especially stage 3 being the most recent and stage 2 being fairly recent. Stage 1 is just like a bit of an asterisk in my mind because of things were just super weird. Maybe if Space Station had their whole roster, maybe they did better, but TSM and Dark Zero also had strangely bad performances, so I don't know, that stage is just like, and maybe teams weren't trying that hard because you couldn't qualify for a major. I don't know. I don't know what happened that stage, but stages 2 and 3 were a little bit more consistent. Anyways, Dark Zero, they definitely can work their way back up here, but I think based on the performances, especially in stage 2 and 3, they seem like the 5th best team in NA at the moment. They barely made it into the top 4 in stage 3, and I suppose they barely made it in stage 2 as well, getting 4th place, but it wasn't nearly as close. They had to get in on tiebreakers for stage 3, so they did make it to both of the majors. They had a fair performance at the Mexico major, not as good as Sweden, and then a surprisingly good performance at SI. But all of these things together with just some like pretty decent performances and then some like really mediocre performances, I just put them here. I think they are the least lethal of all of the teams, but I think if they can tune up a few of their players, maybe most notably Hyper and Canadian to some extent as well, and they can look a little bit more solid than they did in stage 3, which they did, to be fair, at the NAL finals and SI. They looked like they were more in gear, the team as a whole. But let's see if they can reapply that back to best of 1s. Okay, so above them, even I have Oxygen, and maybe Dark Zero deserves to be above Oxygen. Oxygen having 2 new players, but they do have that 3-man core that has just proven time and time again to be so consistent, even right after new players come in. So Boxe, Vertical, Laxing are still here, and then we have Newers and Dream, and I think they're both super good players. Dream has proven himself as a super solid support in T1, and Newers proven himself as a super solid fragger, but we have not yet seen him in T1. I think they're going to do really well, though. I think they could even do better than this, but just because it is a little bit of an uncertainty, I'm going to put them down here. I think it's entirely possible that these guys go up to number 1, though. We'll have to see what happens. So that leaves us with the top 3 here. Sonics, Space Station, and TSM. So TSM, the reigning world champions. Space Station, the most dominant NA team last year within the best of 1s. And then we have Sonics, perhaps the overall most consistent NA team and the winner of the NAL finals. So they all have this sort of claim to fame, being the best in certain regards. But, and this might be another controversial one, I'm going to have TSM here at 3rd. And this is heavily based on the fact that they haven't proven themselves to be that fearsome of a best of 1 team. So 5th place in stage 1, 2nd place in stage 2, back to 5th place in stage 3. Maybe if that 2nd place had come in stage 3, if they'd proven that they were on an upswing, but they did struggle there, and so they didn't get to play at the NAL finals. They were quite good in the SI qualifier, made it to SI, and then they won SI, so that's massive. So I don't think I can put them below this top 3, this top tier at least. So again, maybe this is a little bit interchangeable within tiers, but I am going to put them at best of 3 because we are, again, playing the best of 1s. I just keep saying it, but it's so important. I think a lot of people are fail to consider how important that really is. I do think, or I do feel like they are favored a bit by the whole the map pool changes, and then maybe even the attacker repicks. And I mean, they are just coming into this as the best team in the world. The team that won SI, I suppose, is sort of the de facto best team in the world, no matter how you're considering things. But back in NA League, I don't know that I can put them at number 1 because they're sort of inconsistencies. And then we didn't even see them. They didn't even beat an NA team at SI. I mean, they only played one NA team, and that was Dark Zero in the groups. But so, you know, they're just, for some reason, against NA, they're not as good as they are against other teams from other regions. So I'll put them at 3rd place. They could just smoke everybody and go up to 1st place. But I think there's a good enough case for them to be like 2nd or 3rd. So I'm going to put them there. And I did predetermine, I had this all predetermined, decided how I was going to order all this. And this is the one that I'm unsure of. So I'm sort of making up my mind as I go right now. So, right, Sonics outperformed Space Station at SI. They didn't play them and beat them there, but they outperformed them. by a significant margin, and then they also outperformed them at the NAL finals. They got first place, and Space Station got third/fourth, but they didn't beat Space Station there either. In Stage 3, and even in Stage 2, Space Station was by far the most dominant team, only dropping a single game each stage, but the game that they did drop in Stage 3 was to the Sonics. It ended up being like 7-5, and I think they did go to Coastline, and I felt like that was just a little bit questionable for them to go there. I feel like maybe a different map in Space Station would have taken it. But because of all of this, Sonics being, I think they proved themselves as the best, or the second best team overall if you're just considering the stages within NA. So Space Station, obviously the best. Point-wise, they were like head and shoulders above the rest, and then Sonics and Oxygen were, I think, tied on points, but I'd give the tiebreaker to Sonics. Right, so Sonic second place there, but in pretty much everything else, Sonic's number one. In terms of just consistency, they were better because Space Station had that really weird 7th place finish Stage 1, whereas Sonic's got second, third, and again, outperforming them at the NAL finals and at SI. I'm going to give it to Sonics, I suppose. So Space Station could entirely be number one, because they were just so good at best of ones in Stage 2 and 3. And I mean, we haven't seen best of one since then, but in the non-best of ones, in all of the best of threes that we've seen in Space Station, they haven't been terrible, but they had a lot of really close calls. They just narrowly beat FaZe, they narrowly beat Na'Vi, and then they just narrowly lost to MIBR to get knocked out of the tournament. And I suppose I forgot to mention Empire. They also played in the upper bracket, but that was a fairly handy win by, not a destruction or anything, but a fairly handy win by Empire. So I guess, yeah, I think Sonics look like perhaps the best team coming into the NAL. They've been quite good against NA teams, and they've proven to be very consistent, and they even seem to be on a bit of an upswing, considering that they did poorly at the 2 majors, going out in groups both times, but so they got 4th place in their group at the first major, the Mexico major. They got 3rd place in their group at the Sweden major, and then they did very well at SI. So consistent results within the region and an upswing internationally, and thus I'd say an upswing just in general. I think puts them at number 1, at least in the power rankings. I feel like these 3 are interchangeable to an extent. I mean, of course, I did explain how they all have merit, how they all sort of have a claim to being the best at a certain thing. But when we recalculate things based on what we will now be playing, I feel like this is the correct order. Maybe you switch Space Station and Sonics. I feel like TSM is good at 3rd here. Maybe you switch these 2, and yeah, I guess maybe you switch any of these 5 really, but especially within this tier and this tier, it could be in any order. So yeah, this is my best guess on how they are going to place after Stage 1. I mean, maybe after I see the very first play day, I might have things that I'd like to change, but this is what I'm going to rock with. I'll probably be doing predictions for the matches as we go along. I did that for last stage, and I predicted like a fair few correct. I got a pretty decent percentage by the end. And yeah, so I guess that's gonna do it. If you have your own personal opinions, let me know. If you think anyone, I mean, I guess, like I said, the tiers can be switched around, but if you think somebody is just absolutely in the wrong tier, maybe you think one of these 5 teams should replace one of these 5 teams up here. Maybe you think TSM should definitely be number 1. Maybe you think Mirage is actually better than Parabellum or Xed or whoever. Let me know if you care to. But otherwise, leave me a subscription. Makes me feel good / helps me out, I suppose. A like does the same sort of thing. And okay, yeah, with all of that being said, I will catch you guys in the next video.